My name's Jim Valentino.
All right. So, um, starting with you, how did your interest in comics, sci-fi, movies, pop culture begin?
It began for me when I was about 2 years old. I started drawing and I started making up stories. And my dad read comic books in World War II. So he brought home a bunch of comics and it was like a religious experience. I never wanted to do anything else.
Did you manage to get any comics? Did you manage to keep any of those ones from World War II?
No, but I rebought some of them that from my childhood.
Oh, I mean, and the ones that you were drawing when you were younger, did you manage to keep any of them?
Oh God, no. No.
Who were you reading?
Who was I reading
Yeah, like
when I
in
was
terms.
two?
Oh, no. In terms of the comic books that you were reading, what sort of artists and writers were you looking for?
Well, I was fortunate. I was born in 1952, which means in 1962, at the birth of Marvel Comics and the Silver Age of DC Comics, I was 10 years old, which is the perfect age. And in 1972, I was 20 years old and in college, so that meant the underground comics, Robert Crumb and all those people, were very influential on me. And so it was kind of a combination of both of those things. So Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, Stan Lee, Murphy Anderson, Robert Crumb, uh, Vaughn Bodie, just name them, and they had an impact on me.
So, so your family was really supportive of you
I didn't
reading
say
comics?
that.
Oh, no.
They were, kind of, sort of. It's like everybody else's family. They didn't want me to waste my life trying to become an artist. Get a real job.
Um, so just for the record, what do you do right now?
I am a co-owner of Image Comics, which is the third or fourth, depending on the month, largest comic book company in America. Co-founder, co-owner, and I have my own division of Image called Shadowline, and I publish and I edit, and occasionally I do some drawing still for charity, but not a whole lot.
Nice. So, going into just jumping into Comic Con, how did you get involved in Comic Con?
I'd heard about Comic Con, I think, for the first time in 1973 or 74, and we had just missed it. We had come into San Diego for some business and had heard about it, and we had just missed it, me and a buddy of mine, Randy. And so we had determined that next year we were gonna go, and we did. And I realized that it was a place where I could meet people who were in the business and on the periphery of the business, and I could learn about how to get into the business because there were no books, there was no internet, there was no easy access, and there was no how-to books in those days. So I figured this was the way for me to learn how to get into the comic book business and what it was about, and looking at it from that angle and meeting people, and that's basically what happened.
So, who were you able to talk to, or who was notable in sort of your formation as a comic book writer, publisher, business
Well, the
person?
the first the first professional I ever met was Jack Kirby, which was kind of like meeting God, in a way for those of us who grew up with his work. But the guy who was most influential to me was Ken Kruger. Um, Ken took me under his wing. He believed in me at times when I didn't believe in me. Encouraged me and kept me going. Taught me a great deal about business and just all kinds of stuff.
What work were you working on when you felt like, why do I keep? I guess like what I'm trying to get at is, were you working on a project?
No, I was doing a whole bunch of different things. I mean, when you're starting out, you're it's like being in a band and playing sock hops. You just play anywhere you can. When you're starting out as an artist, you just draw anywhere you can. Anybody that'll take you, anybody that won't. We were doing small press comics. You go do 8 pages, go down to a local Xerox place, run off 100 copies, and sell them through the mail. We're doing a lot of that kind of stuff. It was just about getting your work out there and getting it seen, getting your name out there.
So after the first year at Comic Con, did you got involved in it, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So, what roles were you taking up in the original in the
On the
organizing
committee. I think at first I was helping with the art show. Craig Anderson, who later went on to become an editor at Marvel Comics. I did the program book in 1979. I think I was the co-editor of the program book, which was the only program book that got banned at its own convention, I think, ever, which I was kind of proud of. And what else? I think I quit after that. I was only there for a couple of years.
Were you close to anyone on the organizing committee?
Yeah, sure, I think. I'm trying to remember who was on it in those days. Wendy All, Jackie Estrada, Charlene Brinkman. Uh, yeah, I'm sure there were more. I'm just not remembering.
So you named three of the, I think three of the women who were on the organizing committee.
I kind of liked women, I guess.
So,
they were always more noticeable than those other guys.
let's just jump into the real I guess your relationship with the organizing committee. Like how was working? Who was from the main organizing original body? Who was there?
Oh, Richard Butner was a great guy. Sheldorf. Less said about the better. Ken Kruger. Oh gosh, I can't remember. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people.
So probably laying off a bit on Shell, but tell me more about Ken, because I know he seems very influential in your formation as.
Now, I don't know what I can tell you about Ken. Ken was the grown-up in the room. Ken was always on an even keel. I think I saw Ken lose his temper just a couple of times, and it was pretty severe stuff in all the years that I knew him. Ken had an ability to recognize diamonds in the rough. He could see talent where other people didn't see it, and he knew how to nurture it and bring it along. Not so much by things that he would tell you, but just ways that he would move someone through things. It's kind of hard to explain, but he was extremely good at it. He was funny, very funny, kind of crusty. He was sort of your favorite uncle, with a big cigar in his mouth and, telling dirty jokes. He was that kind of guy.
Yeah, we've been getting a lot of comments on some of the materials hidden in the back room. So,
he was a colorful character.
Yeah. Did you work with Barry, Richard at all during the course of your
Barry Short?
Alonzo?
Oh, Barry Alonzo. No, I've never even met Barry Alonzo.
Okay.
As far as I know.
What venue was the Comic-Con at during
El Cortez.
El Cortez?
The El Cortez years, yeah.
So tell me more about the El Cortez, because I think that's something that we need to really explore, is what was the con like? What did you experience?
It was fun. It was great fun. We had a ball. I mean, it was just, during the days, it was, regular convention, just like you see here, people selling old funny books and toys and movie memorabilia, stuff like that. But at night, it was pretty much a party, and pretty much anything went, and anything did go, and I think everybody was very young, and it was a completely different era than the one we live in now.
Any stories you would particularly like to share, or
any stories I can get away with? One great memory was with Dan O'Neill. Dan O'Neill's a cartoonist, does a underground cartoonist. He did the Air Pirates, for which he was sued by Disney. It was sort of a pornographic Mickey Mouse comic, and he did a strip called Odd Bachkans, which was very, very cool, very surreal, sort of son of George Harriman. Anyways, Dan was a banjo player, and we were going down these hallways at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, passing around a bottle of whiskey and all kinds of smokables, and making a thorough racket of it, going from one floor to the next. And for some reason or another, we never got caught. And the guy who was in charge of Comic-Con security said he kept on telling the hotel detectives, he kept on pushing them in the wrong direction and onto the wrong floor. So he had somebody following us on a walkie-talkie saying, okay, they're on floor 3, at, room 22. And he'd go, they're on the 5th floor, and they're on the other side of the building. And so he was directing them over there while we were creating a public nuisance. So that was one of the memories.
And I'm assuming that the Cortez was packed.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah.
So I know with the previous interview, it was really fun just to see the interactions between attendees who dressed up and then attendees who didn't. Like, did you have any fun interactions with anyone who did dress up or didn't dress up, and sort of what were the reactions?
The people I knew didn't dress up. Meaning costumes and stuff? Yeah, no.
No?
No. No.
So, leading into your career, how does your career, how does Comic-Con affect where you go professionally?
Now or then?
Then, and then leading into now.
Comic-Con was a focal point, and it was a focal point for the year. It was a place where you networked. What I tell people now is when you go to a convention, any convention, don't go thinking that you're going to get hired. Go thinking that you're going to meet people. You're going to network with people. And these people, the people that you meet will probably become lifelong friends, and they will become connections, because you never know where anybody's career path is going to take them. And if you talk to the people who have been involved in this in San Diego Con for the last 40 odd years or whatever, the career paths are rather amazing. They're educators and scientists and winemakers and people who went on to do animation and television, movies, comics, whatever. And the career paths have just gone all over the place. So it's kind of cool. You never know who's going to go where. So you make those connections. It's similar in a way to like an extended college, if you will. You make certain friendships in college. You make certain connections that may serve you for the rest of your life. And in a lot of cases, I think in the San Diego Con, that's what happened.
Okay, and how did that develop your professional life later on, like getting older and not?
Well, it becomes that focal point. Okay, for our company, we display every single year in San Diego. It's a major part of our year, of our focus. We announce a lot of new projects and things like that. So it is a vehicle. It is a vehicle for the whole entire industry. And that's basically the way we use it.
So I noticed a question that we post everyone: has Comic-Con really changed in terms of it being more Hollywood centric?
No, it's always that way. It's always that way. A lot of people, I think people who say that probably weren't there. I remember one of the first shows I went to, there was this poster for this movie that no one had ever heard of. And it was drawn by a guy named Howard Chaykin, popular artist, now very popular in those days. And they were trying to drum up some interest in the fans for this movie that no one had ever heard of. Well, the movie was called Star Wars, and they got us, as a result, the fans, to go that first day, and the TV cameras went that first day, and they saw people lining up around the block. So that was 1975, I guess, or 76. So to say that San Diego, that the Comic-Con hasn't been involved in movies throughout its history is completely erroneous. I just heard Mark Evanier yesterday saying that he went out to dinner with Frank Capra. You don't get much more movie than Frank Capra, He came to San Diego Comic-Con. It's just the connection has always been there, and always should have been there. It's all the same thing. Movies, television, music. We have tons of musicians that show up every single year because they're fans. Tons of actors that show up every single year because they're fans. They grew up with this stuff just like we did. And their careers took them in a different direction, but it's all kind of interconnected. When you get around to it, so it's fine. The only thing that's different now is that it's so much larger than it was.
How do you feel about the increase in attendance, or like that's probably an understatement? How do you feel that the growth? How do you feel the growth of Comic Con?
It's a little overwhelming. It's a little overwhelming, but it is what it is. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. So it is what it is. It's the biggest show of the year. And that going into it, there's going to be a crush of people, It's very business oriented now, where it used to be more fun oriented, but it's very business. So, that going in. And I don't care. The more people that are there, it means the more people I can sell my books to. So, I look at it that way.
And were you originally from San Diego?
Oh, no. No, I'm from the Bronx. No. Well, but I moved to San Diego specifically to become a part of the convention, to become a part of Comic-Con.
And that was in what year again?
Oh, God. 1975, I guess, or 74, something like that. Memory kind of fades after a while.
No worries. So I want to dig into that a little bit. What was your parents or your family or friends' reaction that you were going to move out west to?
Well, they lived out here.
Oh, they lived out here?
Yeah.
So what were you in New York?
What were they? Huh?
The Bronx, New York?
Bronx, New York, yeah. Yeah, well, I was born there. Was there as a little kid. Then we moved to California.
All right.
What was their reaction to me moving to San Diego?
Yeah.
Well, by the time I moved down here, I'd been out of the house for a number of years. I'm sure they threw a party and stuff like that. It's like, yay, he's moving away.
Yeah.
So,
it's a question we've been asking everyone we've interviewed is what was it about San Diego that made Comic-Con happen and grow?
that's an interesting question. I think the answer is a lot of the people in the comic book industry, at least, were from the East Coast. Okay, so the major publishers were on the East Coast. So, if you have a convention in beautiful San Diego, where it's 75 degrees year-round, and there's a beautiful breeze coming off the ocean, and the beaches are clean and nice, and the water is swimmable, and Disneyland is just up the freeway, guy who's working as an editor or a publisher on the East Coast can bring his family to the West Coast, have a vacation, he can write it off, and boom, he's a hero to his wife and his kids. They go to SeaWorld, they go to Disneyland, he does business, everything's a write-off. Couldn't have been more perfect. Couldn't have been a more perfect place to hold a convention.
So that's what made it, so in a way that made it easier for the organizers to bring
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sure.
So, in a sense, that's probably what brought you to San Diego too?
Well, yeah, well, kind of. I didn't have a family in those days.
So, and what brought you, I know following some of the history of Image, what brought you all together at Image Comics? Because I know, Jim Lee, Will Spertasio were part of that beginning set.
No, they were not.
Oh, they weren't? Okay.
No. What brought us together? Rob Liefeld was talking to the three people that he trusted most in the industry, his three best friends. And that was Todd McFarlane, me, and Eric Larson. And he was trying to talk us into forming our own company. And there were some issues with Marvel. We were all working at Marvel at the time. And Todd and Rob were going to New York in December of 1991. for an auction. Sotheby's or Christie's, one of the two, I can't remember. Anyways, they were auctioning off X-Men #1 by Jim Lee, X-Force #1 by Rob, and Spider-Man #1 by Todd. So Todd and Rob were going. Todd was retired at the time. Rob was talking to Eric and I about doing it, and it was Todd. Todd finally agreed to join forces. We were going to do this. So when they went to New York, it was Todd and Rob, and Eric and I were, as Todd put it, in their back pockets. So it was the four of us. They ran into Mark Silvestri at a hotel. They told Mark what we were going to do. Mark signed on immediately. It was like, wow, I've been waiting for someone with the stones to do this. Boom, he's in. Then they talked to Jim that night. Jim was very hesitant, wanted to see the numbers, blah, 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 wasn't real happy about the idea. He just wasn't real sure about it. They went to see Terry, what was his name? Terry somebody at Marvel. The guy who was running Marvel at the time, can't remember his name now. But this guy told them basically that they were cattle, that they could get anyone to pick the cop. Terry Stewart. Pretty much they had a meeting with him, and the meeting, he offered us Epic, and he offered us the right to own our own stuff and all that kind of stuff with the Epic imprint at Marvel. And he misunderstood. We weren't in there to negotiate, and it wasn't a negotiation. We were just telling them we were leaving. That was it. And you ought to treat your people a little bit better so this doesn't happen again. So Terry Stewart managed to insult them, including Jim. And I think they walked out of that meeting, a little bit angrier than they walked in. But Jim and Mark, if you look at the very first press release for Image Comics, Jim and Mark are not mentioned. And they're not mentioned on purpose. They didn't want to be mentioned. They were still hedging their bets a little bit. So that's the way it happened. That's the way it started.
What year did Image come to Comic-Con?
Well, the first one was 1992. That was the first year of Image. We had been the guests of honor at the Chicago Comic-Con. And Marvel and DC had pulled out because of it. And in order to facilitate crowd control, the Chicago Comic-Con had put us in a tent away from the building. So we were out there all by ourselves, and the other professionals all hated our guts because they thought we were being grandstanding, but we really didn't have anything to do with it. And we spent 3 days in this tent with just an endless stream of people walking past us. So, for us it wasn't a lot of fun. We're, hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? Hi, how are you? That was the 3 days we spent. Then we came to San Diego, and we started to announce all the people that we were bringing into the company, that we were bringing in, because we were allowing creators to own their own work and to do whatever they wanted to do, and Image would support them and support that work. So we had like Sam Keith and Jerry Ordway and all kinds of people, and they let me do the announcement of the person that I was bringing in the very last, and that was Alan Moore doing his first work in comics in several years.
What was the reception of that?
That was pretty much it. The whole entire room just gasped.
Did you get any hate from Marvel or DC, especially with Alan's relation?
I never noticed. I mean, there were some people that were, that were nasty, about it, and we knew who they were. But people like Tom DeFalco, who was the editor-in-chief of Marvel, remained friendly with all of us to this day. He's just a great guy. The majority of people were okay. We got stuff from, we got crap from fellow professionals who thought we either didn't deserve it or shouldn't have done it or whatever, and we were sort of like, well, you could have done it, you just didn't. We did, so there you go.
Is there anyone in particular that
No, I don't want to mention
All
names.
right. I want to get your opinion on this. Like, where does comics stand in media right now in terms of the pop culture? How is comic books seen?
um, I think comic book ideas and comic book movies are accepted very well. Comics themselves are not, which is sort of funny. There's this weird dichotomy there, where the Avengers could be the best selling movie of all time, and yet fewer than 100,000 people read the Avengers comic. There's a real dichotomy there. The Walking Dead is the most watched TV show ever right now, or in many, many years. It's the most popular show on TV. And yet the comic doesn't quite sell, 100,000 units. Why? Why is that? Where's that discrepancy? Why aren't those millions of people who are watching that TV show or going to that movie theater and they know it's based on a comic? Why isn't that translating? I don't know.
Do you think that has to deal with the American perception that comic books are just for kids rather than adults or adult or readerships of all?
Well, anybody who thinks that The Walking Dead is just for kids, really, I hope doesn't have children. It's not really. uh, could be. I think comics have hopefully been removed from that perception that they're just for kids or they're just for, illiterates or subliterates or whatever. I think if you actually read a comic or talk to the people that make comics, that notion goes away rather quickly. Um, you know, these aren't subliterate publications by any means.
So going in a similar vein, what role does comic book sci-fi play in the greater academia? I guess how does it play in what we and is it something that's valued and is it something to be learned and studied in the classroom?
I think it can be. I mean, I don't know that it is necessarily. I know a lot of educators are looking at it. I think a lot of educators are looking at a lot of early reader comics for reluctant readers and things like that. I know I know there's a lot of literary discussion about certain comics, the work of Craig Thompson and a few others. That Sandman, perhaps Neil Gaiman, far more literary aspersions, in that direction. I don't really know. I think it would be up to each individual um, educator to make that call, not me.
Is there anything you would want to comment about? Like anything you would, especially about Comic Con or the people that made Comic Con? I threw out names, excluding the one that you said. Just don't touch. Don't touch. So,
I think a lot of the people that have been responsible for Comic Con, and there have been many, many, many over the years. I mean, there's just been, people usually come into the committee, at least in the early days, and would stay for a couple of years and then leave. And they were very dedicated, and they really enjoyed what they were doing. And not all of them were comic book fans. You know. Gene and Mary Henderson, come to mind. Gene Henderson was a big X-Men fan, but I'm not sure that Mary ever read a comic in her life, Yet they were an integral part, of the convention, at least in the 1970s. There was Tom and Virginia French that ran the original dealer's room. All I remember about Tom French was that they were listening to baseball games throughout the whole entire convention. They just enjoyed doing what they were doing, and that kind of interaction they enjoyed. But it wasn't so much about the comics necessarily. I think as it was about the people and the sense of community and the doing something that was interesting and frustrating and constantly changing. And there was a dedication to that, which seems kind of strange, but it was kind of cool, actually. I saw a lot of that. And the people that weren't dedicated to it left pretty quickly because it was a lot of hard work. And it still is. It's a lot of hard work to put on a show like that.
So if you could speak about the transition of being being an organizer and then moving into a professional, what was your experience going from someone who knew everything was about to happen and becoming someone to to having to deal with possibly former friends, like how come this doesn't happen? Why is this doing?
I think it had the opposite effect for me in that, well, it was a, it wasn't just an overnight thing. It was sort of transit, sort of a transition. As my career, took its path, the people that were running Comic-Con and that were involved in Comic-Con, many of them remained friends. I'm thinking Jackie Estrada and a few other people that remained friends throughout the years. So when, like for Image, when Image exploded, because Image was kind of, it kind of exploded like we were rock stars all of a sudden, and it was very, very odd being in that position. But when things didn't happen or when Comic-Con couldn't do things, I sort of became a liaison there because I knew what they were going through, the Comic-Con committee. I knew the structures that they had and the hurdles that they had to deal with. So I could talk to the other guys, in that way, and just say, look, they have to do all these things, they have to figure this out. They can't just jump from point A to point Z. They've got to take a stairway up. And it helped a little bit. That my position. And when the Image guys decided that they wanted to do their own convention, I was there to talk them out of it because I knew what it entailed and told them, we really don't want to do this. This is not a good idea.
May I ask why? They were considering doing an Image convention. I know there's a couple of companies that do their own little thing. I know Blizzard, for example, for video games, does a whole set of previews for.
Yeah.
Was that the similar vein?
I don't know what they were thinking. I thought they were crazy. It's just no, this is not a good idea, guys. It's it's real expensive. You have to put up a whole lot of money. You have to put up the insurance. You got to deal with all the programming, everybody's egos. It's an enormous amount of work, and beyond. So to run your own business, to run your own company, to put out your books and do all of that, and do this on top of it, yeah, it's way too much.
So I guess, how does it feel to come back to a conference of this small size, coming back to its beginnings? How does it feel to come almost?
I do a lot of small and medium-sized shows, and mostly I do small and medium-sized show. I prefer them. They're more relaxed. They're more kicked back. So I kind of prefer them. They're a lot less pressure. So these days I do a lot of smaller shows like this. They're just more fun. So I'll do shows where I target where, who's going to the show? Is it people that I know and people that I want to hang out with and have dinner with and go have drinks with? Then I'll go to the show. That's the biggest criteria for me.
Who are the writers and the artists? I know that's sort of what Comics Best here is today, that chance for the fan, the artist, the writer to come together and talk and just make community.
Right.
It's who do you look for in terms of when you make that decision for
to hang out?
Yeah.
Oh, old friends. Buddies. People that I've known for a number of years. It could be any one of 100 people. Here it would be Scott Shaw. A few other people. That I've known for any number of years. There's a whole bunch of them here. Wendy Scott, Roger Friedman. Just tons of people that I've known for forever. Just depends. In the heyday of Image, somebody wanted me to go to a convention in Dallas. They asked me what it would take to get me there. I said, bring in Don Simpson, Larry Marder, and Bob Burden. And they were like, what? It's like, bring in my buddies, and I'm there, It's like, there you go.
And did it happen?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it did. Yeah, we had a great time.
So I guess if there's any imparting advice that for anyone trying to get into the industry,
Don't. Become a lawyer or a doctor.
Is that because of the state of the comic book industry right now, or is that?
Well, the comic book industry's in good shape. It's just, yeah. If you're going to be a creative person of any type, whether you're a writer or an artist, a dancer, a singer, an actor, whatever, you really have to want it. You have to want it so badly no one can talk you out of it. You have to wake up every morning wanting it. And if you can't wake up every morning and start working on your own by yourself, if you can't put up with all the disappointments that it takes year in and year out before you finally make it, and then knowing that even after you've made it, your career path is like this. 1 year you're up here and the next year you're completely down there. And that's just the way it goes. And it goes that way for everybody in every entertainment field. Very, very few Frank Sinatras and Paul McCartneys in the world. Very few of them. Most of us, it's a constant struggle, back and forth, up and down. If you can't deal with all of that, if you can't deal with the rejection, if you can't deal with the fact that half of the people who see your stuff will hate it and hate you, not the business for you. It takes a tough skin and it takes a lot of tenacity, and most people don't have it. So become a lawyer where everybody hates you, or become a doctor, where you can lord it over everybody, and make a lot of money and have a consistent, consistent amount of pay and security, because there ain't no security being a creative person. It doesn't exist.
And I guess the last thing I have is, in one word, how do you describe Comic-Con?
Overwhelming.